All right, let's get started. So, welcome everybody. This is our next Storybook and Chromatic webinar, all about test coverage, specifically front-end test coverage with the just launched Storybook 9. I have with me here, so I'm Kyle. I'm a DX engineer on the Storybook team. I'm responsible for a lot of the learning materials, like the docs, tutorials, blog posts, things like that. I have with me here Dominic, who is one of the co-founders of Chromatic as well as Storybook, and then Hert, who is one of the earliest employees of Chromatic and a core maintainer of Storybook. You guys want to say anything else about yourselves?
Yeah. Hi everyone. My name's Dominic. I'm one of the co-founders. Really excited to have you here. Really excited to see what Kyle has in store for us and walking through test coverage. Don't hesitate to ask questions. Put them in chat. I'm on hand to answer. Hart's on hand to answer. I'll pass it to Hart. You want to introduce yourself?
Yep. Hi all, I'm Gert, one of the engineers on the Storybook team. And I've been involved with a lot of the ongoing development on the testing features inside of Storybook for the past year or so. And I'm really excited to see how everyone's been using the capabilities that we have in Storybook now, and how you think about the coverage features and how do you plan to use it or are already using it. So let us know in the comments.
All right, let's kick it off. I accidentally clicked, so sorry about that. So the structure of this is just going to be like a quick presentation just to provide some context around what we're talking about, and then I'll demo the features that we're really here to focus on, and then just an open-ended Q&A so that we can all learn together. So to start, front end, when you're building an app today, a lot of your front end complexity, and therefore most of what you need to test and verify, is in components. I don't think that's a very arguable statement these days. I think that's pretty well understood. But I really want to illustrate kind of what that means and why it can actually be a challenge. So let's start with just a single component, which have kind of components themselves have kind of exploded in complexity because they have various states and behaviors. Like this chart might have like an overtime variant, a warning variant, a like test passed variant. And then in addition to those states and behaviors, they need to adjust to their environment. They have things like color scheme and localization and responsive viewports and network conditions. And just that's kind of the nature of front end development, right? Is it's not one single target that you develop for. It's this almost infinite combination of, oh, browser version. Didn't even mention that. That's a pretty big one. Um, so yeah, components, just one single component has a lot of different facets to it. And then you consider a lot of components, and they all have those multiple facets. And working on and keeping track of all of that is really difficult. It's a lot to keep in your head. So that's why we built Storybook. It's a workbench for those components, and it comes with a whole bunch of tools. We're going to talk about some of those tools today. So Storybook, if you're not familiar, is made up of stories, which are like individual scenarios for your components in those states. And so you can kind of see this in the code sample there on the right-hand side, where the export const, like no selection part, that's a story. And all it does is it takes a component, it renders it, and then you supply it with like some props for kind of like configuration. It might be in some modes like those viewports or the color schemes or things like that I talked about. And then it might even have some behavior associated with it where you can like simulate user interaction. And so what Storybook does is it allows you to create those stories, it organizes it into that sidebar so that it creates kind of like a catalog of all of these scenarios of your components. And then you can then revisit those things instantly without having to like manually recreate those states by spinning up your app, which may be a whole thing in and of itself, but you spin up your app and then you go to this page and you click this button and that lets you look at this modal, which is really what you want to work on. Instead, you can just have a story for that modal and directly visit it. Let's see. So the stories, you build it by providing the like configuration for it, which we call args. That's kind of like the props for the component if you're from like a React mindset. And then some of the other tools. So we use those args to produce controls, which you can see down in the bottom of this screenshot here, which allow you to mess with the value of those args and kind of see how your component changes with different inputs. So that's one of the major tools for Storybook. Another set of tools is up in the toolbar there, where you can change the background. You can apply like a grid to make sure everything lines up right. And so it's this really powerful, multifaceted workbench for your components. And so that's kind of the first big idea that I want you to come away with during this webinar here is stories capture your component states. Like that, at its root, that's what they do. And that's what Storybook does, is it captures your component states. So all of that complexity that I illustrated earlier can be captured and cataloged so you can really quickly like visit and work on anything that you might need to work on. And in Storybook 9, those stories that capture those component states can also be tests. With just a little bit of vtest config, because that's what it does, is it runs vtest test under the hood. And we generate that config for you on install. But with that config, you can run all of your stories as vtest component tests with the push of a button. And so when I say component tests, I mean interaction tests for behavior. I mean accessibility tests to ensure equal access across all your users of any ability. I mean visual tests for checking like how the look and feel of your UI. And I mean coverage for knowing what to test. And that's primarily what we're going to talk about today, is that coverage piece. So code coverage, if you're not familiar, is it's a tool that instruments your source code so that it can then measure when a particular part of that code is executed. And then it will produce a report, like the one on the screen here, for your analysis so that you can kind of know which parts of your code are covered by tests and which part aren't. And it's especially that aren't part that's really important. So that's the second big takeaway for this session. You can use the coverage report to know which components and which component states you haven't yet tested well. And it's built into Storybook tests. So as you're testing and as you're developing in Storybook, you can know where you need to add some stories to get better coverage as you test with Storybook. And oftentimes you can generate the stories you need without writing any code. So let's move to a demo. All right, I'm hoping it's now a blank browser.
Yep.
Cool. Okay, so I have Storybook here. And so just real quick, so here's the sidebar of all of our stories. I have, in this case, like a button component, a calendar component, a header, a login form, and a page that kind of combines some of those components. So if I take, this is new to Storybook 9, we call it the test widget. And when I click this button, I've got coverage and accessibility toggled on. And so when I click that button, it's going to actually spin up a vtest, a Playwright instance, actually, using vtest test runner behind the scenes. And it's already done, you can see. But it does that behind the scenes and runs all of those stories as tests. And then it'll, in this case, because I toggled it on, it'll also run accessibility checks. And then because I toggled coverage, it calculated coverage for me and gave me a summary here. So I can see that I have roughly 91% coverage from the stories in this project. And if I click that, I can open up an interactive HTML report here so I can see that, all right, these all look pretty good, but what's going on with this coverage demo one? Like it's zeros across the board. I can see like there's everything's highlighted red, like nothing executed here. Well, that's because I don't actually have any stories for my coverage demo component. So I can just click this plus button here next to the sidebar to let me add a new story. And so when I do this, it's going to search across my file system, and it's going to, in this case, find the coverage demo component. And I could just highlight it, click enter here, and it created a stories file for me. So let me show that. If I go to VS Code, it created this file for me from scratch. And in this case, label is a required argument. And so it created this label arg for me so that it can render properly without errors. And so that's what we see. We've got a, you didn't know this is what it looks like, but that's what a coverage demo component looks like with the label. And just to show the controls here, so label is this. Well, that's weird. I've never once seen that. Now? Huh. I don't know what I broke. And then we've got some variants here where I can make it black or purple or pink. And so just with this default story, I want to rerun my tests so that I can see what kind of coverage I have now.
Hey, Kyle, can we hang on for a sec to answer a couple questions? Hart, you're going to
Yes, certainly.
answer first one live from Cipriana. So is the test widget added as part of the test add-on, or is it default configuration in Storybook 9?
Yeah. So this question points into is about the testing widget we have in the bottom left corner of Storybook. This widget itself is a core feature of Storybook 9, but it requires what we call a test provider to hook into it in order to provide some, at least like one test provider needs to be there, but add-ons could register as a test provider. So there's potential for more test providers to show up show up over there. So currently, you need the add-on vtest add-on to Storybook in order for the test runner to show up there in the bottom left corner. There is also the Chromatic visual test add-on, which also hooks into this API to show the capability for visual testing. So right now you need the vtest add-on primarily to get that thing to appear.
And then
Can I expand on that?
go ahead.
So in newly initialized Storybook projects, you're given an option for kind of a default install or a, like choose your own adventure kind of thing. So like while yes, it does require the add-on, we'll guide you into setting that up, and we do by default.
Tanvirli, I think that would have answered your question too. Okay, so another question: is there any way to combine Storybook coverage reports that you just showed us, Kyle, with JEST and VTest unit tests or Cypress end-to-end coverage reports? So all these tools kind of like you generate coverage reports, and oftentimes an organization, engineering manager, engineering leadership, tech leads will want to see the kind of overarching coverage to understand how much is covered.
Yes.
Yeah.
The short answer is yes. I'll specifically demo that in a little bit.
Amazing. Okay, so Gabrielle asks, is the feature to add a story by searching the components in the code base a React-only feature? Will this become available to view as well?
That's a great question. It should be available to everything except the Svelte CSF, I think. Is that your understanding, Inherent?
Let me think. Code generation for stories. I believe all the major frameworks are supported, like React, Vue, Angular.
Mm-hmm.
Svelte, I'm not exactly sure about, to be honest. But it doesn't support all of them. That I know that, for example, Solid it doesn't do yet, I believe, but don't pin me on it.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
Naranda
I'm
also
almost certain that it works for Vue though, specifically.
Yeah, Vue, yes, pretty sure.
Naranda has a follow-up question. Also, hey Naranda, great to see you again. Well, when creating new stories through the UI, can we configure it to use a specific naming scheme or folder structure? Maybe this one's for you, Hart.
Not at the moment. You in terms of so it uses the automatically generated story names and things and components. So it means that the location on disk matters. Though it does take into account the story globs, which you can configure to be under a certain path. So if you have multiple CSF, like story globs, story file globs, I believe that it does take into account when you add like a new component through the create new story UI. It matches one of those CSF globs and thereby will put it under the right category.
Yeah.
The UI itself, though, doesn't like give you that capability to like move it yet.
Thanks, Lockhart. Kyle, I think continue going for now. We'll answer the question
Okay.
from these other questions as you go along.
Okay. There was, as long as we're paused, there's one very important thing. So we haven't done a great job of communicating during these webinars what Storybook tests actually supports. And so, as Harriet explained, it requires add-on vtest for its like core component testing functionality, which means it requires Vite. So it works with basically anything that Storybook uses Vite for. So we have a Next.js Vite framework that was specifically K-were built for this support. React Vite, Vue Vite, Web Components Vite. The Angular framework in Storybook right now uses Webpack, and so it is not supported. However, we're in active conversations with their team because they themselves are moving to Vite for their own project. And so we're with conversations with them to figure out how Storybook can best support Angular going forward. Okay, so
I want to ask,
I'm going to
whether this recording will be shared, by the way.
yes, it will.
Oh, yes, it will be.
All right, so where we left off, we just added this default story for our coverage demo component, and our coverage summary went up from 91% to 98%. So let's see what that actually looks like here. Oops. All right, so yeah, great. I went from zeros to not zeros. So let's dig in a little bit. So we can see, yeah, majority of the code, if it's not red, it means that it was executed, and it actually gives us a count of how many times it was executed. But if it's red or yellow, that's indicating that red is not executed at all, and yellow is like it was executed, but it's not really covered well. So in this case, we see, okay, we've got these two background colors. We didn't cover those. We didn't cover the fact that it can be rendered as a link, and we didn't do anything with our handle click functionality. So let's handle those things now. So if I go here and I change the variant from black, the default is black, to purple. And then when I do that, I'm given this toolbar down here in the controls panel. And so I can actually make a new story here. I'll just call it purple. And then similarly, I can take pink. And then I'll do the same thing where I render it as a link. Oh, interesting. I have some style changes. I should probably address that later. But for now, all right. And then the final thing I said, we need to handle, or we need to like be able to check that our on-click is working correctly. So for that, there's this amazing add-on that lets you record user interactions and even like make assertions based on those interactions. So let me show you how that works. This is, let me pull it up just real quick. This is Storybook add-on test code gen. So would one of you mind sharing the
I'll paste it
NPM or
in.
GitHub to that? Yeah, thanks.
Yes, I'll do it.
All right. So I'm going to start recording. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to click that. And then I'm going to add an assertion that has that text. And then I'm going to stop recording. And I'm going to save it to a story called onClick. And so now if I visit that onClick story, think this is related to why the label for controls was not working. So let me go look at that generated code, and we'll see what's going on here. Yeah, I just got a little confused by the way the label was working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move that args label, or the label arg, up into the meta, which means it applies to every story instead of just the default one. And so now, when I come back here, it has a label. If I rerun it. Oh, I had messed with the control. All right. So I'm actually looking for label, not label is this. There we go. Okay, this is what I wanted to show you. And so now this is how we show those interactions within Storybook, because we've got this interactions panel, and we can see, like, I'm trying to find something with the text label. I click that something, and then I wait to make sure that the text is correct. And so now I've got this passing. All right, so now I'm going to run my tests once more to see what my impact on coverage is. Well, it says 100%. Let's see how accurate that is. Yeah, it looks like we're rounding up a little bit. We're pretty darn good. And so that is just kind of like a silly, obviously made for demo narrative, but it shows you how you can use the coverage as insight into what you have and have not tested yet. And for a lot of cases, you can just add those tests, which are stories, directly inside a Storybook without actually touching any code. So the final thing that I wanted to show you was to answer that question about how do I combine this with all my other coverage? And the answer to that is really, I'm just going to quit my Storybook that's running here. And then I'm going to run my tests with a coverage flag. And to show you, pull up my package JSON here. So my test script is just running vtests. That's all it is. So if I do that, it's going to run my stories test. It would also, if I had any unit tests in this project, it would run those as well. And then it would calculate coverage for everything. And this coverage report is, I mean, it's just vtests, in this case, Istanbul, I think, coverage report. And so you can use Istanbul to combine it with any other coverage reports that are coming from other tools. Like, it is built on top of these very standard testing tools. When I say it, I mean like Storybook's testing experience is built on top of that. And so in the CI environment, you just use the tools that are already you're comfortable with and are readily available. We didn't like reinvent the wheel here when it came to coverage. We're really just exposing what was made available. Okay, with that, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here and open it up for just kind of general Q&A.
Thanks, Kyle. One of the reasons why we built coverage and why we're pursuing Storybook test is because historically front-end testing has been pretty tricky. You have to render a lot of the stuff in the browser, and that resulted in hazy coverage, a hazy understanding of coverage for your front end, especially when you consider things like themes, modes, viewports, accessibility, all the things that your users actually end up facing. Historically, you wouldn't have been able to tell the rest of your team or your leadership that, like, hey, we have this under control. With Storybook test and these new coverage features, our goal is to kind of equip you with the ability to kind of have that confidence moving forward. We're happy to answer questions. Just drop them in the chat.
I see one that I'll go ahead and answer in the Q&A, asking if accessibility is part of the vtest add-on as well. Let me share my screen again just so we have like a visual. So the answer is kinda. So we have an accessibility add-on. It's right here. Kind of hard to demo. There's no violations to show you here. But yeah,
Go to
so
passes. Go to passes.
sure.
You
Yeah,
you
there we
can.
go.
It's a really similar interface for
Yeah. Okay,
passes
so here
versus
we can see
violations.
like I do actually have very sufficient color contrast. Um, so this runs kind of like on demand as you visit the panel. If you have the accessibility add-on installed and the add-on vtest installed, then you'll get this checkbox here, which will run all of these checks whenever you also run your component tests. And so that's exactly what I've been doing. I've been actually running accessibility checks alongside my component tests. So it's not necessarily part of it architecturally or even like how it's built or anything like that, but the experience, it was designed to be able to run just alongside and simultaneously.
Yeah. And similar to Vitess tests, it runs them through Playwright. So it actually uses Axe Core to run those tests, the accessibility tests against all of your stories rather than just the one that you're currently looking at. That's what the
Yes.
accessibility tab in Storybook gives you. It only gives you a report for this current coverage demo component, and not a view of all of your components. And that's why the Vitest add-on is so great because it tests all the all the stories and not just the one you're looking at. So it's also something you can actually integrate into CI. You don't actually need to always use the Storybook UI to start a test run. You can actually just use the Vitest CLI to start a test run that includes this coverage, that includes the accessibility, and runs it all with Playwright on your CI environment
Without running Storybook at all.
without actually running Storybook itself. I mean, you have to, of course, make it accessible to Playwright, but that's beside the
Um,
point.
yeah. A typical a question that we get asked is like, what's the difference between what Kyle just showed here from a component testing standpoint and the old way of like just JSDOM plus testing library or EasyDOM. Can maybe Hart, you describe like the architectural difference and why we chose the path that we chose? Or
You mean Playwright over JSDOM?
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah. So, um, right, like historically, the way to go for testing any kind of component, UI components, would be to render it with, say, Jest, right? You say render this, and then Jest would go and hand it over to JSDOM or a similar tool to render it in Node.js. But Node.js, of course, does not have a whole browser. So what JSDOM does is it sort of acts like it is a browser by rendering your DOM in like your HTML and all of that uh, on like in Node without drawing any pixels, right? And uh, it included like APIs that browser usually provide for clicking buttons, typing text, and all of that sort of stuff. However, well, what we found is that JSDOM always lags behind what the current actual browser capabilities are. So you might be building a feature using the latest and greatest CSS features that are like available on baseline currently, and then only finding that your testing tool does not support those features yet. And so then your testing tool is holding you back from actually adopting new best practices. So that's one. And the other is fidelity. A actual browser, be it headful or headless, so either it actually pops up on your screen and you see it doing things, or it just runs in the background. Doesn't matter. It being an actual browser is higher fidelity because those clicks actually do something, and the JavaScript actually executes like it would in the real browser of an end user. And so it's much like more reliable in the sense of doing like being as much alike as production as possible. Um, so those are the two main reasons why we we opted for Playwright over JSDOM.
Yeah. And the speed is, I guess maybe the third thing is that the speed is pretty equivalent at this point, or perhaps
Yeah.
this new Playwright, like headless and headful mode, is faster than the past JSDOM, believe it or not. Thanks for
I don't think it's faster, but it is equivalent.
yeah, comparable.
Like you'd think, because it's spinning up a full browser and doing all that, like that it'd be way slower, and it's just not. We did extensive benchmarking to show that this was the way that Storybook should do it, and yeah.
So there's a question about Chromatic here. So how does running visual tests with Chromatic through the testing widget inside of Storybook differ from regular uses of Chromatic? So we didn't actually demonstrate it here, but when you would install add-on visual tests into Storybook, you would get a second test provider in the testing widget in Storybook to run visual tests with Chromatic. That add-on requires you to sign in with your Chromatic account, and so then when you run tests through there, it is akin to running the Chromatic CLI. In fact, that is what it does under the covers. It runs a build for your Storybook, like a static Storybook build, and then it runs a Chromatic build through the Chromatic CLI, which is identical to running a Chromatic build in like a CI environment. And then the added benefit of doing that, though, is that you also get a user interface in an add-on panel inside of Storybook that shows you the visual changes right inside of Storybook. So you don't actually have to go to chromatic.com to review the visual changes. No, instead, you actually get a sidebar in Storybook that lights up with a bunch of dots for like, hey, all the yellow dots for all the places where there's visual changes detected. And then you can like navigate to the story and see the visual diff right there in the add-on panel, and actually click on approve right there and then. And then on top of that, there is an additional benefit that you can in fact do this on code that you haven't yet committed. So you can make changes to your code, to your component, and not commit anything, but you can run visual diffs and accept the visual changes and then commit and push your code. And this is something that Chromatic can do because it relies on going through CI and relies on visual changes to be pinned to a particular commit. And so what we've done for the visual test add-on is, instead of just looking at the git commit, we actually look at the hash of changed files that you have in your Git repository as an additional identifier for the snapshots. And that, combined with your user identifier, we know that when you then run, like you commit, you push your code, and a CI build runs for Chromatic, it finds the same visual changes. It will auto approve those visual changes if you've already approved them locally. So you can actually get the whole workflow going locally, and only when you actually commit and push your changes and you share them with the rest of your team, that's when that becomes a baseline for all of your team. So we figured it out. It's fairly complicated, but that's the TLDR.
Yeah, I think no, Kurt explained it in very great detail. From my end, like, it shortcuts the having to push a build to CI and have to run your entire test suite and all your other checks. This basically like allows you to run Chromatic, get results in like in less than 2 minutes, and then see what changed in the front end without having to spin up like a staging server, your entire backend. Like, I don't know, like our CI takes what,
Don't
like
have to wait
15,
for
20 minutes? Like,
pipeline to kick in.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
Since we're talking
thanks,
about
Tiago.
visual tests, there's a related question about do I have to run Chromatic every time I also run my component tests? And we built it specifically to give you the option to do whatever you want. So in the test widget down here, I was always clicking this run component test button, which only runs the things in that part of the panel. So it's going to run my interaction tests, it's going to calculate coverage, and it's going to run accessibility checks. It is not going to run visual tests. To do that, I would have to click this separate button. Or if I do want to run everything, we have this run test button down here, which you can actually do like when it's collapsed even, and that'll run everything. So you can use it however you want with your workflow.
I have a question from Vikram. How current are the browser versions used by Chromatic for cross-browser testing? We choose the latest stable versions. Typically, those are a couple versions behind the most current, like bleeding edge. The reason we do that and focus on stability is we want to prevent false positives. And the way that we prevent false positives is naturally new features tend to stabilize. And so we try to keep up to date without being at the cutting edge, because sometimes there are regressions that make it into the latest versions of browsers. Infrastructure updates happen over more frequently than like every 9 or 6 to 12 months, depending. So yeah, thanks for the question, Vikram.
Dom, it looks like there's two other questions in the Q&A that are both related to any plans for coverage in Chromatic. One of them just in general, and one specifically about coverage for visual tests.
Yep.
So,
we just launched this coverage feature in Storybook. We want, not like our aim is to see how it is used, see how the community adopts it, see what y'all want from this coverage feature before we bring it to Chromatic. So all of this, everything that Kyle just showed you is completely available via the Storybook test CLI, and you can use it today. We are definitely considering though, like how we present coverage in one command via like npx chromatic, as you have it now. We're just not quite there yet, and we want to see how it's going to work, or like how our community has wants to use it before we commit further. Okay. Actually, there's a couple more nuanced questions. So
Sure.
Dimitri, I think you had a question about like, is it stored? Let me just like bring up that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I might have prematurely answered that.
It's so Dimitri, you're from the 5-second glimpse of what your question was, is the coverage data stored in Chromatic? It is not currently stored in Chromatic, though we have an idea, perhaps more than an idea, to bring coverage over time to you, so you can track coverage at for every feature branch and on your main branch, and that allows your entire team to kind of get a sense of, hey, where are we at right now with our testing practices. Okay, so Vikram,
Yeah,
I think you have
maybe
one.
this is a good segue to talk about accessibility as well, because we did go as far as to integrate the accessibility results into Chromatic. So when you run Chromatic these days, you also get the accessibility results, and you get the accessibility results over time in Chromatic with like a nice graph that shows you how you're progressing in terms of accessibility of your product. So you might draw some inspiration from what that does this today for in terms of coverage, right? We might do something similar. I mean, no promises, but we're thinking about it.
Yeah, the trick is, like I really wanted to emphasize that all of the coverage capabilities within Storybook tests are built on top of what VTest and Istanbul already provide. Like, and that's to specifically allow interop between your various test suites and to make sure that like we don't break any workflows there. We have to do the same thing in Chromatic. We can't just provide a like Chromatic and Storybook specific solution. We have to find something that integrates well with all these other tools. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you can also integrate this in CI, for example. You can have CI generate these reports and integrate them into other tooling that you might already be using in your organization to track coverage.
Vikram has a question about the best practices for setting up baselines in Chromatic to avoid false positives or unnecessary reviews. So as far as avoiding false positives, there's a number of levers we provide in terms of configuration for, like, for instance, if your anti-aliased fonts are just like 1 pixel too many off, you can adjust the threshold for what we consider a like failure in the test. Or if the animations are causing you issues, well, most of the time we just default delay those or disable those for you. But there's some levers you can pull there. So for the most part, just as you encounter them, we have lots of ways to solve them as far as false positives go. And then for unnecessary reviews, oh, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'm actually pretty excited about all the kind of work that we do to prevent false positives without you having to do anything. And I'm pretty close to this myself, so I can maybe speak to it. So we
Please.
have a feature called Steady Snap. If you're familiar with Chromatic, it's kind of similar to Turbo Snap, but Steady Snap has a kind of 4 ways to prevent false positives without you having to do anything. So the first is we do render stabilization. So how that works, I mean, if you think about like a like image stabilization in like a camera, same thing. So we render a snapshot. We check that it is like stable before we kind of surface it for diffing. And the way that we check for stable is like we use like image hashes. The second way is we have this feature called burst capture. So what burst capture is, think about like how your iPhone works, or the new Pixels work. They take a bunch of pictures and then they choose the best one, right? So yeah, for us, like we take a bunch of renders without charging you at all. Take a bunch of renders, we choose the best one, and then we surface that for diffing. What's more, we have we freeze frame animations, videos, and animated GIFs to choose the most stable kind of stable point in time to take that snapshot. And then finally, we have a kind of a migration feature for baselines that help you that takes snapshots on different infrastructure. So when an infrastructure changes and gets upgraded, your snapshots remain stable. So there's a bunch of ways that we help stabilize and prevent false positives in your snapshots without you having to do anything. And then everything that Kyle mentioned, thresholds, specific timing for animations, etc. Those are additional features that help you stabilize it further. But our goal here is like, shouldn't have to do very much or anything at all to get the best visual testing experience possible. And we spent a lot of time and energy on making sure we're snapshotting the right thing for you. I hope that answered your question, Vikram. Best practices, other best practices are like keeping a green main branch of accepted visual test baselines, and then always branching from that, ensuring that your feature branches are green before you merge them back in. This is stuff like that.
Yeah. For unnecessary reviews, we have what's called Turbo Snap. So that will, like if you know, like watch mode, when you're running tests, it only retests what you've actually changed, like in your source and in your tests. Turbo Snap is kind of like that for visual tests, where we'll use your dependency graph of the components themselves to check like, oh, well, if you're only changing this component source, that's only used in this component and these 5 components. And so we're only going to rerun the visual test for those, not everything. And that'll cut down, what's the average? It's like 70+% or something, isn't it?
It's on average 41% of across the
41.
entire,
Okay.
well, the entire like projects that we benchmark. And like, but like if you think about it, you can get up to 90%, 99%, like
Right.
faster test times depending on how much how many tests have actually changed or how many components have changed in your
Yeah.
system. So if you've changed like literally one thing on a component that is only used like 1 or 2 times, and you have 1,000 stories, like we only take one snapshot,
Right.
and then we pass everything else.
Yeah. And on the flip side, if you do something like change a global style sheet, which doesn't really follow a dependency graph, or if you like update a package in your package JSON, we will automatically run everything just to make sure that we do give you the opportunity to catch anything that could happen. Because that's the last thing we want to happen is have you ship some broken UI.
Aaron has a question of where's the best place to reach out for help with Storybook configuration. Aaron is currently running V9 with RS build and struggling to convert this over to Vite in order to make use of these features.
Harold, it looks like you started typing an answer. You just want to say it?
Yeah, I was gonna say Discord is usually the best place to ask any kind of technical support question.
Yeah.
For Chromatic customers, we do offer some technical support through our support engineers at Chromatic. But usually, if that's like highly specific things such as RS build, for example, uh, our support engineers don't like Chromatic doesn't officially support RS build, so our support engineers aren't trained on it, and so you'd still be better off going through Discord and talk to us directly. Yeah.
Yeah, or GitHub discussions too.
Yeah,
if
GitHub
you want to
discussion.
expose that to the rest of the
If you have
community.
like a specific problem that you're running into, it's better to have like a GitHub discussion about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, might be a good place to point out that there is a website called DeepWiki. I'll share the link actually. That we often use for like getting answers to questions about Storybook. There is,
Yeah.
I'll put it in chat right now. So DeepWiki is a AI like an LLM trained on the Chromatic code base, the Storybook code base and the Storybook documentation, so that you can ask it questions about Storybook and it'll answer based on like what's in the docs, what's in the actual code base, how does Storybook work, like deeply. It like I find myself using it more and more often because it's just highly convenient to find an answer to something that's like hidden somewhere down in the docs. There's a question about TurboSnap being a plan of Chromatic. It's actually on all the plans. TurboSnap is just a feature that you get always,
Including the free plan.
including free.
Huh.
Yes.
Nina asks, what's the difference between using VTest add-on and just doing the normal test runner?
I'd love to take that if that's
Yeah,
all
go
right.
ahead.
So first off, I'll just say this is something we're actively working on clearing up. Our docs aren't doing a great job of making this clear. So did you notice that before I ran the test command in my CLI, I actually completely quit the Storybook process? So that's the main difference is the VTest add-on doesn't require a running Storybook to do your tests. Because what it's doing behind the scenes is it's actually transforming that story into a VTest test that has nothing to do with Storybook anymore. Like it used the story as kind of like the source, but once it's a VTest test, it doesn't have anything to do with Storybook and it just runs as a VTest test. And so therefore it's really fast. Whereas the test runner, you have to have either a published, like at a URL, or a running in a like process Storybook to point it at. And you have to do that first before the test runner can then visit those running stories that absolutely requires Storybook to run the tests. And so it's a lot slower. And also, it's a lot more tied to Storybook in just everything. And so that means that all the configuration, all of the interoperability with other tools, all of that is more Storybook centric and just we kind of dead ended at what we were able to do. And so that's why we built the add-on V-test because it's faster and because it's more like standardized amongst the industry.
Also add that like we're trying to give you the best developer experience, and the uh, the ecosystem changes a lot, and sometimes the ecosystem doesn't have a great solution. There requires like an architectural change, a fundamental architectural change to offer certain performance breakthroughs, and that's what we found with the test runner and V-test. It's not like they functionally do the same thing, but in order to get the performance that we wanted to deliver for our users, we needed to change the architecture, and we couldn't get that performance in other with the previous architecture.
That said, we are well aware that there are, for instance, Angular users out there or React Webpack 5 users out there that rely on the test runner. And so it's not going away until we can like have a solution for running, whether it's add-on V-test or something else. But yeah, it's not going to go away until we have a solution for everybody. So it is, for now, for Angular, for example, it is still the way to test your components using Storybook.
Okay. There's a question from Renzo about is Chromatic going to be available for React Native iOS and Android? That's currently we're in research and development on that. What we've just been able to do as a Storybook project is bring React Native in line with our with like mainline web Storybook. That's huge thanks to our contributor maintainer there, Danny Williams. So that's like the first step, and even like broaching that question. The next step that we've been experimenting with, and we have a proof of concept on, is a GitHub Actions based like runner to simulate iOS. I believe iOS. So you can actually take those React Native snapshots. That's just that's like the latest that we have so far. We're still in the progress of like connecting all the dots to make that possible. I can't give you a time frame, just because there's a lot of moving pieces to that, especially with regards to performance and stability. And so we try to guarantee things that are going to be performant and stable. So we need to do a little bit more research on that. Thanks, Renzo, though. Naranda has a question of, speaking of AI, can you talk about any plans for Storybook or Chromatic MCP server? I'm going to post a link to an RFC that just landed maybe days ago about a Storybook MCP server, but I have someone in the room, Hart, who can maybe shine a little bit more light on our thinking there.
Sure. Yeah. So the plans for an MCP server, we've been talking about it because we would love to be able to more tightly integrate with your development workflow. And an MCP server is then like right now the same thing, like the thing to do, right? So we definitely want to do that, but it's not as easy as it sounds. Like it's not like we can look at or like even vibe code an MCP protocol into Storybook and be done with it because of the architecture and the fundamental structure of Storybook right now. One of the issues we're running into is that Storybook is inherently like very much runtime in the browser. So you boot up a Storybook server and then it boots, yeah, you have a browser where it renders the stories. Unfortunately, most of the state and information about your stories is only available in the browser, and the Storybook server actually doesn't know all that much about your components and about your stories and their metadata. And in order for a MCP server to be really useful, we actually need to have that information so that the MCP server can provide it to Cursor or any other editor. And so what we actually have been talking about for years at this point is something we call the annotation server, which might be the key to unlocking the capabilities that we need for an MCP server. So yes, we want to do this, and I suspect that this will happen this year for sure, and hopefully sooner rather than later. But it is not like a simple let's patch on a API and call it a day. It's more of a fundamental thing inside the Storybook architecture.
Yeah, to add to that, I think the bigger picture for us, and where I certainly see the industry going is allowing uh, through MCP agents to function autonomously. And so it doesn't take much squinting to see that Storybook can provide initial context for LLMs to generate better things on the first shot, and can provide additional context via Storybook test, accessibility results, coverage, which we just showed, visual test results, to help LLMs autocorrect themselves before returning responses to you. And so the performance has been a theme of the last couple of questions, at least for me. Like, we want to be able to do this as performantly as possible, so that you as like an AI powered developer can get better results initially and better results through iteration. And that iteration doesn't have to be human agent. It can be agent or agent Storybook MCP, and then that agent can return those, like, the results that you actually want without much effort from you.
Yeah, just
Cool.
wanted to add that
All right.
as far as I know, at this point, we're thinking about a Storybook MCP server more than a Chromatic MCP server. Even though Chromatic could like add extra context as to historical events, right now the crux is on Storybook to provide like information right here, right now, quickly on your local machine, rather than going to a remote to get some information.
Okay. Looks like we're at time. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. This has been great fun. And we hope it's helpful.